Protagonist, the main characters of a narrative, with the video games, that being the character that usually the player is the one controlling. Whether it be characters that start from the front, characters who come later, and stuff like that. But because of interactability and the fact that the player has to do certain actions, it can also make it to where the stuff the character does may need limits, or the developers are cowards. So sometimes they hold back on certain ideas. Big one to go with from the start is Mario, Super Mario Bros. Series. Why go with him? Because when it comes to Mario, yeah, there are RPG games that do try to have more fun with narrative ideas, but in the main games, you get Mario's personality across pretty well, whether it be just his jumping animation, how he does things, how he jumps on his opponents, or in the 3D titles where he starts having dialogue, just the more simple stuff he does, like the jolly nature of the way he acts and does things. In fact, he's having fun with his adventure, so the player is assumingly also having fun with the adventure. The fact that Mario 64, he'll comment about getting tired of falling asleep, and you can hear what his dreams are. Just stuff like that to make him entertaining character, and just add more to it, add charm to this character, even if he's a man of few words, generally in his games, and stuff like that. Just the way he acts, the way he animates, adds all the charm of protagonist onto Mario. Same thing also with Luigi in Luigi's Mansion series. Once again, he's not a dialogue-heavy person, but the way he acts, the way he's scared, the way that they gave you an entire button dedicated to him just calling Mario, the fact that it changes depending on how much HP Luigi has, and stuff like that, the way that he hums the music as well and completes the track. So just the fact that you can make these main characters and get their personalities across just based on how they act and how they animate and what they're doing. You don't need a lot of words in order to get this across. Another good example of this is also Link, Legend of Zelda series. You usually know it as being a silent main character, or more so, he talks, but generally the player doesn't get to hear it, since there are instances where he just has to respond to people. But it's one of those things where he doesn't exactly speak, and I've seen people who started with Breath of the Wild hearing about how much Link is a beloved main character, and being surprised that he doesn't speak or anything, and at that point, some people question why he's so beloved, since people usually associate a great main character with what they have to say in the adventure. But with Link, it's with the fact that each incarnation has their own little personality and quirk to the main character. Skyward Sword, you see the whole relationship between him and Zelda and how he's willing to go do anything. Wind Waker, the cartoony nature blends itself to the more wacky way Link either just responds to the situation going around him and just everything going around. Twilight Princess, the more grim nature and Link going on his adventure being more serious and determined in what's going on. Stuff like that. And you have the Breath of the Wild series, where Breath of the Wild, Link has these memories and go get. Ends up adding more to him now via these cutscenes as well, or his journal, or characters talk about him, stuff like that. Also to add the caveat that I'm calling him Link, but in most of the games, you could just call the character anything really, because you could just name the character. It wasn't until the Breath of the Wild title and those era games where you have to call the character Link, because the games are voice acted, so they need to call the character something, so they're gonna call him Link, which also means you can't call him anything else. You can't put your name, you can't make up a name and stuff like that for those titles and era of Zelda. Something that really shocked people that they did that, and you ask me, didn't really add a whole lot to the whole entire overall narrative or anything, but it's a decision they decided to make, and they ran with it. So it's one of those things where before, you kind of have a bit more connection of naming the character, but in those specific titles of Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Age of Calamity, Age of Imprisonment, you can't. And springboarding off the Legend of Zelda, you have franchises that are known for shaking up the cast and who the main character is. Something such as, well, right now, Final Fantasy. with all the mainline titles generally having a different main character for those games. Final Fantasy 1, those warriors alike could be different people from Furion in 2, which is different from the Onion Knight in 3, or Luneth from 3 Remake, and stuff like that. So Final Fantasy 4, Bards of Final Fantasy 5. Final Fantasy 6 is where it gets iffy, because the developer idea was that every playable character in that game could potentially serve as the main character of the story. That was the idea they were going for, where Final Fantasy VI isn't supposed to have a main character per se. With that being the case, they failed spectacularly because many of those characters, the story doesn't really work if they were the main character leading role, with why many default to the idea that either Terra, who you start with, or Celeste, who basically assumes the leader position in the second half of the game, are the main characters of that title, because they end up taking this position that ends up feeling more in line with it, where Terra ends up feeling more like the character we're following for half the game, and then Celeste feels more like the leader position and stuff like that. The main complaint about protagonist Final Fantasy doesn't really happen until you get to around Final Fantasy XII, where many do not like the main character Vaughn, or feel like Vaughn is unimportant to the event of the game. And while Vaughn isn't exactly the big driving force when it comes to later parts of the game, early on, he is the character we're following, and he does cause certain characters to end up meeting up, so it's the kind of thing where, yes, without Vaughn being there, certain scenarios wouldn't happen, everything, but people tend to complain because Ash ends up having way more driving force in the story with her role, but it does not suddenly mean Vaughn does nothing or is suddenly less protagonist just because of that. And then there are people who say Balthier is the main character, that's because they just like Balthier and that's it. He doesn't do anything main character-wise, people just like him. Nor are these self-insert characters, whether it be stuff such as the main characters from the Fallout series they generally play as, where you have way more control what you're doing. For example, I'll go with Fallout New Vegas, and the choices you have and stuff you're able to do. When I played Fallout New Vegas, one thing I did was just go to places, do the side quests, and then just massacre everyone there for all their loot. There was one point where I had to go to a town that I ended up having a bad reputation with because I've been slaughtering their people before I even got there, and I decided to get them to like me just enough, just so that way they'll let me do their side quests, get all the EXP and loot, and then massacre them. Because ain't no town's gonna be left with people once I'm done with it. When I played Fallout 3, I went to early in that game, I stole that machine gun from that sheriff, ran to freaking, I think his name is Tenpenny, and then detonated that nuke from that town just because. Just because. Has there even a good reason to do so? Not really, but hey, they can't let me do it, so I decided to do it because it may be evil, I'm being the evil path all the way. Kind of one Terra idea where games can be that kind of freedom when it comes to self-insert. There are also other times where the self-insert still has aspects of personality, like Persona games where all the main characters have personality aspects to them that you can tell from their interaction, how they act. So they're not fully self-insert, even though people say they are, because you know, self-insert can make the choices, but at the same time, you can tell they have a customer personality and what direction the story is going. You can't make them do something they wouldn't really do, as opposed to like Fallout, where they could just do the most baffling stuff out of the freedom to do so kind of thing. Remember another other kind of thing where you may just make your own custom main character as well. Like Fallout's make a custom main character, but you also have stuff like South Park games, like Stick of Truth and Fraction of a Whole, where you're able to just make the new kid wherever you want kind of thing. And the fact that the story just calls you the new kid when no one actually calls you the name. And then that's how that main character also gets ran around as well and stuff like that. Saints Row used the main character throughout their first 4 games, and it's one of those cool aspects where that character starts out as more of a self-inserty silent main character, although they do have moments where they do say something, which is used to more comedic effect, or the characters communicate trying to talk to a main character and talk back, like trying to get love advice, the main character just says nothing kind of thing. So Then on Saints Row 2 decided, okay, let's give the main character the ability to have personality, but the voice you choose change the personality of the character, at least how they speak, and stuff like that, where now they're now a speaking role, but they have much more to say, and honestly I thought the games are better off for it, even if Saints Row 1 did manage to get mileage out of some of the main character, but Saints Row 2 and onward really tries to do more. Well, Saints Row 3 and Saints Row 2 and 4 try to do more. Saints Row 3, I'm not sure what they were doing, but kind of one of those things where going from silent main character to a main character that now talks. Now we get to the thing that make people upset, which is changing main characters. They already mentioned how Final Fantasy changed the characters throughout each title, and sometimes people get upset by that, but there are other cases where a franchise can have a certain main character and then start introducing someone new, which tends to make people upset, or even introduce someone new midway through, like Last of Us Part 2, having a second playable main character midway through that made people completely mad about the idea and everything. You know, when the first game decided to have a second playable main character, people were more open to the idea and everything, so it's one of those interesting points. But let's talk about a main character that got a lot of flack when they were new, and they come from the Mega Man X games. You probably know who I'm talking about. Actually, you don't, because Curveball, I'm not talking about Axel Mega Man X7, who does get hate to this day for their inclusion. I'm talking about Zero, who got so much hate for his inclusion in the X games. Something I was surprised to read up on, because I'm from a point where people like Zero. Some people like Zero more than X, but when Zero was new, Inafune wanted to have Zero's design potentially be a design of Mega Man X, but felt it was too different. He's right, that is too different. So instead, he decided to submit it as a different character, and thus we got Zero. Although this gets misconstrued as people thinking that Zero was someone that Inafune always wanted to be the main character. No, he wanted the design to be the main character, but not Zero's personality specifically. But when Zero started out, he was more of a mentor role to Mega Man X, and then X3 gave you a taste of Zero with him being playable. And then X4 is when the complaints started coming out, because now Zero's one of the playable main characters. Like I said, nowadays, people love that inclusion, but it's just crazy to me seeing people hate the fact that Zero started getting more and more prominence, whether it be the fact that his story in X4 as a whole is more about Zero than Mega Man X. They may have two campaigns, but the Zero campaign has more going on, and it's also the one that gets memed around way more than anything going on. Same with X5, which also, once again, adds more to Zero's character with stuff with the Maverick virus going on, and the Sigma virus, and notes aspects. Remember, notes again, two main characters, two options, but Zero has a bit more story aspect because of X's whole pacifist nature, where he does have moments where he tries to talk out to the Robot Master, especially in X5, only if I have to turn Maverick right in front of him, which he hates that whole entire aspect. But just the fact that there's more you can do with Zero, which is why when Axel then came along, people then didn't like Axel, and that helped that his voice wasn't the best, because the voice after X7 wasn't really good, but people didn't like Axel because they liked the idea of the young new teen hero who's coming in to be there for a new younger crowd, even if the idea of Axel being a new generation of Reploids was literally part of the point of Axel inclusion. The fact that he is his new generation, his copy ability has devastating implications with what it can do, which X8 does capitalize on from a narrative perspective, but by that point, people just didn't like Axel, so people didn't like Zero, and there's some people still like the fact that Zero got his own games, the Mega Man Zero games, but again, they felt like Zero was pushing X out of his own main character spotlight, and people hate it when a main character gets pushed out of the spotlight of a franchise they started, or X's case, a franchise with its effing name in it. Another main character I've seen get complaints of being pushed out of the franchise is the Southern Kagura franchise, where the main character is Asuka, who's from the Hanzo Academy. But when the series started out, it was specifically the Hanzo Academy and the Hibijo Academy, this academy of good shinobis and evil shinobis, even though their differences aren't really that huge because they're both still assassins at the end of the day. But okay. But then came the spin-off title Shinobi Versus on PS Vita, which introduced the Gessen Academy, and from there, Asuka's spotlight as the main character, or at least reception, was now on a time limit. Because once they introduced Yumi, the fan base in Japan gravitated towards her way more, to the point where she started being treated as this one-entire main trio of shinobis, even though it's like, what? And to the point where Estabal Versus has a DLC mission where they break the fourth wall and joke about how Asuka's the main character, but more and more Yumi gets pushed as Yumi tries to alleviate that that's not true and the fans love her, and then she thinks to herself how her plan to usurp Asuka's main character is actually working. And it did work, to the point where a boiling point was when Blaze Blue Cross Tag Battle added in Yumi as the Southern Kagura character. And while Yumi does play great in that game, the problem is, usually for a crossover thing, people expect the main character to get added in. So people are like, why is it Yumi and not Asuka? Even the creator of the series was surprised that, more so in the West, people were actually disappointed that it was Yumi because, like I said, Japan likes Yumi more than the Western fan base, and to have her in over the main character of the franchise annoyed the hell out of people. A different kind of complaint is when a certain character gets a spotlight for a main character that people generally go, okay, but why though? Which in this case ought to highlight Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, mostly because to a lot of people, they felt like Zack had his story told FF7. It felt like he was just a smaller character in a bigger picture, but that what he did for the story was still good. But some people did not like the idea of then taking that and making him a main character of a prequel title made to tell his story, because people felt like, okay, why this guy of all people? Because people would have felt, why not one of the party members of Final Fantasy VII get their own spin-off? And, well, they did. Vincent Valentine got a spin-off with Dirge Cerberus, but people question, why Zack? And there are still people out there who do not like the fact that Zack got this prominence to a main character status. The fact that he is part of this trio of Cloud, Sephiroth, and everything, when some people felt like it should be Cloud, Sephiroth, and Aerith, even though from the get-go, the logos you're looking at always showed Zack, but that's not the point. People question, why this guy of all people to turn to a main character? Why give him the spotlight? Yes, he's very important in Final Fantasy VII, but still, why? I like Zack more than Cloud and everything, but just one of those aspects where it's just the whole entire thing of taking a character people wouldn't expect to be a main character and then giving them the spotlight. Although my issue then becomes when it comes to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and continuing to give Zack this main character spotlight, or at least kind of position, when honestly, at that point, it so far has no point and just feels like fans are sick of fan service. But as someone who likes Zack, I don't know why you included Zack in Rebirth so far, on top of the fact of, I don't know why Zack's on a box art of Rebirth, in the same way I don't know why Cloud's on the box art of Crisis Core Reunion. Like, take those characters off those respective box arts. What are we doing here? Now, with the role of the main character, there are some things that I feel like comes to the main character, specifically in a video game, it does also shift how some people view certain things. So there's the fact that Metal Gear Solid franchise, since Metal Gear 1, Big Boss was portrayed as a villain. Metal Gear 2, he's also a villain. The whole entire idea that Big Boss is this big evil person in the Metal Gear franchise. That's why we made a prequel title, Metal Solid 3, where he played as Big Boss before he became Big Boss, so he's Naked Snake. People grew to really like Naked Snake. They really like his character and everything. Some people like him more than Raiden or Solid Snake, which is great for those fans, and Naked Snake is great. The issue then becomes when you start getting to more titles with Big Boss, specifically Peace Walker, where Peace Walker is meant to show this shift where Big Boss starts turning into the villain that we knew him from the first game. But the hilarity is the fact that because people associate this dude with how goofy and fun antics he is, there are people who don't even acknowledge the awful stuff Big Boss is doing in Peace Walker, and think that Peace Walker didn't do its job of showing this shift from this more open-eyed, naive man into this more warmongering whole entire aspect, not warmongering, but being a person, being a whole entire mercenary group that will fight for any side for any reason because all they know is conflict, even knowing that everything they do will probably have them sent straight to hell, but that does not matter to them or the people on their base. And it's crazy how he does so much bad. The entire finale has a character literally spitting in his face how bad Big Boss has become, and yet I still see fans not treat it like that because one, the person saying is also a villain, and two, because they like Big Boss and see as he's not doing anything wrong. It's like, oh, he's doing a lot wrong in that game, to the point where the Phantom Pain has this segment that people were confused by or felt didn't explain anything because Peace Walker already gave them the answer they were looking for. They just didn't acknowledge it because to them, they were Big Boss. And on the topic of playing as a more evil character per se, games start to pull their punches when you get to be the more evil character. Like let's say Infamous, where you have the option of good or evil, where of course good for Infamous 2 was made a canon thing due to trophy data because more people rather be the hero and the villain. But even in those games, being evil, like, yeah, you're doing bad things, but in the grand schemes of the plot, you're still technically saving the day in one way, shape, or form. Like Infamous 1, you still take out the big bads, even if Cole's final monologue is talking about how he's now the most powerful person and no one can pretty much tell him what to do. But he still took out the villain, he still took out the First Son, he still took out the Dustmen. Yeah, there are saboteurs where you make more Reapers, but Reapers just do with guns compared to the Dustmen and First Sons. Or also Infamous 2, where even the game's evil ending isn't inherently evil depending on how you look at it. But to talk about the good ending isn't inherently a good ending or a heroic deed, depending on how you look at it. So it's one of those things where some games will pull their punches what you can do as a villain because of that whole entire aspect. Grand Theft Auto lets you do so much villainous actions just freely, and also win the missions. And yet, they'll still have a person you're going after, an antagonist, who does far worse than the character you're playing as. Someone who is the bigger threat to go after, or for one reason or another, and they're generally the worser person than the player. So it's one of those things where, yeah, Grand Theft Auto, you're playing as awful people, criminal underworld, everything. And yet they'll still pit you up against someone that will be far worse than what the character is doing, which you are a villain, but you look less like a villain because of the fact that they're putting you up against a greater evil. Tales of Berseria, for some reason, has a reputation of, oh, this is the Tales of game where you play the villains and are evil. They're not evil per se, they're just indifferent when it comes to how they pursue their goal and what they're gonna do. But even then, one of the game's point is that Velvet is not actually this big edgelord villain that she's claiming to be. And two, the Abbey ends up being far worse than what you're doing. Even early on, the stuff they're just casually doing, like, oh, we just casually enslave Malakim and we'll literally have them blow themselves up just to stop these demons and everything. It's like, they do horrendous stuff, as well, and it progressively gets worse. So I don't know, people think that Velvet is the worst of the evil in this game. She's not a good person, but like, once again, the opponent you're going after, who are supposed to be the good guys, end up doing far worse in the game. So once again, they are still the big bad. The Caligula effect, I've seen people complain that the main cast are too unlikable, and some drop the game because they don't like the main cast of that game. What is their biggest crime? Being bad people. That's pretty much it. They're just not good people. How they are bad people is up to each character's quirk, but a bunch of them just aren't inherently good people, with that being one of the game's idea of just because someone's on the good side doesn't mean they're inherently a good person or have a noble reason for why they're doing it. Same with also the idea that people don't just change immediately to become a good person suddenly, and that people can and will relapse. Same thing with the antagonist side. Some of those people aren't inherently bad people. They're just, for one reason or another, would rather stay within the virtual world and everything. It's just one of those things where it's just a party of not good people, like, and that's all it takes for people to just write them all. Like, I already brought up a Grand Theft Auto has you playing as fight out villains, or maybe that's not a Peace Walker, this is playing a person who's getting progressively worse as the game goes on. These are just some assholes, and people, like, don't like it. I mentioned Infamous, and how either it's good, its evil endings in 1 and 2 still has you staying in a day to a certain degree. You also have that same idea with Second Son, but Second Son as the extra caveat that if you're fully evil, then the people that Delsin was trying to save don't even like him anymore, from one entire aspect. And has an extra epilogue bit only if you're fully infamous in the game. And I see people constantly complain about that epilogue, being like, why would they make this point in this game? Oh my god, it's so awful and everything. And it's like, are you surprised that a villain character who had one goal and why they became a villain and they aren't able to fulfill it does a villainous action? Are y'all for real? It's like people don't like the scene included, but rather that scene didn't happen. And it could not happen if you beat the game without being fully infamous but still evil. But just one of those things where, once again, you have an option for an evil main character and people don't like the fact that they're fully evil. So I forgot to mention on the topic when it came to Microsoft Peace Walker and people not really noticing Big Boss's shift to villainy is also the game Tales of Vesperia, which has the fan favorite constantly for many years, protagonist Yuri Lowell, and people love Yuri Lowell for a variety of reasons. But one reason people will often cite for why they like Yuri's character is the fact that Yuri takes things into his own hands. This meaning if there are certain things that he needs to do, whether it be certain crimes, he will do. Breaking and entering? Sure. Attacking the police and guards or the code? Sure. Killing corrupt politicians? He will also do that, and that's the one part that people hard focus on. The fact that Yuri will kill people who feel there's no other alternative, and something needs to be done now. But the problem with people are focusing on that and praising Yuri as one of the best main characters in gaming for this fact is that Vesperia also highlights that just going around and killing powerful people isn't gonna fix the problem. It'll fix a problem, but not the problem of what's going on, or you could unknowingly have someone far worse rise to prominence by getting rid of the people in their way, even if the people in the way were also awful people. Just one of those things where people treat it as if what Yuri's doing is just not only a 100% positive with no downsides, but also treat it as if this makes him more of a hero for doing it, even though Yuri knows what he's doing is still bad and murdering people is bad. Yuri knows that he is doomed to go straight to hell for what he's doing and never tries to sugarcoat it that he's the good person. And yet people will still treat it as if he is and ignore every other aspect of his character. It's even a point where there's a freaking antagonist who wants to kill one of your party members for the sake of saving the world, and Yuri doesn't want to do that. It's one of those things that shows his hypocrisy in he won't silently kill someone for this certain thing because he doesn't feel they did anything to deserve it because he doesn't know the full story. Just like how him doing some of the stuff he's done has negative consequences that he couldn't predict. But there are many reasons why Yuri Lowell is a fantastic main character for the Zelda franchise, but these are things that go overlooked, just like the whole thing with Big Boss shifting further and further to villainy. So let's talk about different kinds of protagonists in terms of what they do for the narrative or the experience the games are going for, but it's also topic that something I always remember, something that I worked at GameStop for a bit, was the fact that she said that one of her favorite genres were RPGs, specifically because of the fact that RPGs tend to be the genre that, whether it be as a main character or custom main character, tend to have the most options when it comes to having a female lead option. Sometimes whether it be a main character is always a female lead, like I already mentioned Velvet in this video, but also custom main characters will allow you to just make her own main character, which is a topic that a lot of people, for some reason nowadays, are terrified of having. The only idea that some people also want different kinds of main characters in terms of who they are. Like one thing I'll think about right now is Life is Strange. It's the original Life is Strange. It's an entire game that if Max was a male protagonist, which I think there was pressure at one point to make Max a male protagonist lead, I could not envision anything of Life is Strange really working out the same. Mostly because there's certain aspects like Max overhearing stuff, whether it be in the girl's bathroom, or also the fact of I can't imagine a male lead putting up with Chloe's bullshit. But again, I also can't envision Max putting up with Chloe's bullshit. But that's one of those things where there was pressure for them to at some point try and make a male lead, but I'm glad they did it. And that also reflects a previous game by Don't Nod, the game Remember Me, which also had pressure to try and make the main character a male lead instead, with some of the reasonings publishers gave being the most baffling ass statements, such as saying that having a male player play as a female lead who has a male love interest is quote-unquote too awkward. What the hell you mean? People enjoy romantic love stories. What the hell do you mean? At the time of this video, Resident Evil Requiem is still very relevant, and one of the things people talk about is the two lead setup, which Resident Evil has always done a whole lot, but there are people who either don't like Grace, whether it be the fact that some people wish that Grace was a different character from the franchise. Like some people say, oh, it should have been Claire in her role or Jill, and you guys are not seeing the point of Grace being this average person's horror scenario to have the tension horror there, right? Replacing her with Jill or Claire would make no sense. Or then there's the people who complain that Grace is a bad female lead because they personally don't find her attractive enough, which y'all got issues. But it's one of those things where what's our topic of some people go different directions on Grace, but you don't see that complaint towards Leon being given. Bayonetta is a protagonist who is more famous than her actual games. Like, she's a more popular character than the games she actually come from. Even before she got introduced into Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS and everything, which definitely helped her popularity. It's one of those things where a character being more beloved or more known than the actual game that they come from, which is still being kind of crazy, but also, yeah, it does make sense because if people can reference or use a character for other things as well outside their official source material, to a point where some people won't even know that the character comes from a certain franchise to begin with. I already mentioned earlier Final Fantasy VI, and I know people basically treat, and Square Enix themselves, treat Terra as a protagonist of Final Fantasy VI, which makes sense. The first character you play as very relevant to the story for the most part. But it's also one of those things where you also have Final Fantasy X-2, which had all-female lead of Yuna, Riku, and Pain being a newcomer for that title and everything. But when Final Fantasy 15 came around with an all-male lead protagonist, that was during a time where there were several articles being written about the game being sexist for not having a female lead in the game, at least the main four. And it was just one of those things that I always saw, and then I would actually talk to people who love FF15 about that and go like, oh yeah, there are articles written saying that women were probably not like 15 for this or that reason. And then they go, you're telling me the game with the 4 hot boy band looking boys is the one people wrote articles saying women wouldn't like. And it's like, you know, when you say it out loud like that, yeah, it does sound stupid to write that. But it's one of those things that was written, but people didn't really, at least what I've seen, didn't really mention that because of Final Fantasy X-2, but people had their own stuff Final Fantasy X-2, such as 10 fans, I don't know, 10 fans just go nuts the idea of Yuna being a protagonist because reasons. So I got different complaints of people just not liking it if you were a big fan of 10, and then having Yuna as the main character starting out doing an entire concert. It's not even actually Yuna. I don't know why people get mad about it. Oh my god, just play the goddamn game, it's dope. But it's one of those things where you had an entry that did the whole entire all cast being one gender, but then when another entry did it, that's where people started suddenly having a complaint for it. And then ironically, Final Fantasy 16 gets more praise for the female characters in it, even though that game underuses them or throws them under the bus constantly to promote the male characters, but that's besides the point. Also, weirdly enough, Final Fantasy 16 also got flack for only having Clive as the protagonist, the only character that you play as. But once again, Lightning returns. Lightning is the only playable main character. Both are action titles, but for some reason Clive got more complaints about it rather than Lightning did in Lightning Returns. You also have certain franchises that for years had people who wanted a female lead in the game, whether it be Legend of Zelda, which technically did have the 2 CDI games, but no one counts the CDI games for jack all. Or also Grand Theft Auto, which, okay, I think that was less of a fans thing and more, once again, articles being written, but there was a demand of some sort for a female lead, and originally Legend of Zelda had the dumbest excuse by Onuma: never ask this man a question on the spot, he will say something stupid, but then down the road eventually we got Echoes of Wisdom, so, alright. And also Grand Theft Auto 6, one of the 2 leads is a female lead, which, while many people were excited about that, because some people wanted that for years, which once again, some people got mad at Grand Theft Auto 5, had 3 male leads, and went, really? Couldn't put 1 female lead in the 3 main cast? But, once again, I can't imagine Grand Theft Auto 5's story working if one of the leads of that game was a woman. Mostly because they probably would have been doing some of the bullshit Michael or Trevor would be doing. But it's one of those things where those are franchises that there was a demand of sorts that wanted a female lead, especially in Zelda, since it's named, that series is named after her. But it's one of those things that people want that, and eventually did get that whole entire aspect, which, well, good for them, whenever Grand Theft Auto 6 comes out in 5 billion years. But once again, Grand Theft Auto 6 has complaints of people being mad about one of the leads being woman, some being mad about other aspects of the game, such as the idea of there being non-white people in Florida. Are y'all stupid? Y'all know how big Florida is? But that's besides the point. Assassin's Creed Shadows had not real criticism, but people on the internet getting mad because of its dual protagonist setup, being with Naoe, who's an assassin, and Yasuke, who's a samurai, having this whole entire dual setup where you have Naoe being the more person native to the land, and the locals, everything being built around her, and her being a ninja and assassin, trying to learn more about her mom and the whole entire assassin clan. And then you have Yasuke being the foreigner to the land, and while being a very prominent samurai, the locale isn't exactly designed for his frame at all, making navigation a bit more awkward for him, and also the fact that there are people who see him more of an outcast because he's a foreigner, with even the opponent he goes after late in the game being also someone foreign to Japan as well. You see how this whole entire dynamic between the two actually ends up working with the content of the stories going on. And of course, there are people who got super mad about it and will deny the fact that the game sold several F tons of copies, mostly because people want Assassin's Creed games set in Japan for many years, so of course it will sell several F tons of copies. It could also have been a better game. I think it's good, but could have been great, could have been better. Why does it still have issues I've had with Assassin's Creed for many years? But that's besides the point. People will still to this day get mad about its dual main character setup in that game, and then will praise previous titles for dumb reasons, such as the fact of historical accuracy, which when has Assassin's Creed ever actually been historically accurate to begin with? Or two, how freaking Assassin's Creed has been incredibly absurd in the past? Or three, how the final boss of Assassin's Creed 2 is terrible because that was an instance of them trying to follow history and Ezio couldn't actually kill the opponent there, just for the opponent to have a less than interesting death in the next game, Brotherhood. But that's besides the point. Much of Persona's aspect of being a more self-inserted protagonist, because you have their own personality and aspects to them, but the choices the player gets to make and everything going on, which is also another franchise that people do want another female lead included in the franchise, because we already have two, being Maya in Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, and also the FemMC for Persona 3 Portable's release, specifically only in the Portable release because she wasn't included in any other version of P3. But that also makes the Portable version a way more unique experience. But it's one of those things where people just want a female lead. Some think Persona 5 should have had one, which the only thing I can really think of really barring P5 having a female lead is honestly Joker's reasoning for his probation with the whole entire thing of, oh, they claim that he just randomly assaulted a man, and I feel like if Joker was a girl, that not only would the cops not take that seriously, they just wouldn't even write it down, even if the person in question was a corrupt figure, write whatever he wants. So that's the one thing I feel that wouldn't work, but most of the game, and the criminal records are mattering so... It's weird. The criminal record matters so little in Persona 5. It only matters in the early game and the game's finale. But everything else, it's like Joker's not even a criminal that has a record or anything. So, Persona 5, not sure to work for that one asterisk unless they rework it. Persona 4, probably has a way higher chance, but not what its hopes for people have for Persona 6 of a female lead option. And once again, there are people who have pushed back to the idea for some reason, even if people do like the FemMC and everything, but people for some reason push back against the idea. I remember when Royal was first teased, all we had was the small teaser with Yoshizawa talking to Akechi, and I actually thought it was going to be some side story with the female lead. Instead, they gave me trash and Akechi. So it's one of those things where it had potential, but then they didn't do it, and they could do it in Persona 6, but Atlas is an enigma. And then we got Soul Hackers too, the female lead, being Ringo, and people do like Ringo for all the not a whole lot of people that played Soul Hackers 2. Soul Hackers 2 is good, you should try Soul Hackers 2, but it's one of those things where there are hopes for Persona 6 to have a female lead, and there are also other hopes for Persona 6 that I'm not going to mention because people just be weird about it. A small bit I'll mention is where people who specifically for JRPGs and exclusively JRPGs tend to want more adult main characters, citing how many JRPGs either have a school setting or have a younger cast because they're going for more coming of age story. With Persona, I mean, people want adult cast again, which, once again, if we're going to the framing of the calendar and social link system, I'm not sure it'd work, but also something like people go, look, Yakuza Like a Dragon and Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth also managed to make it work with an adult cast, except that's a completely different kind of game with a crime store and everything going on. what's happening in Yakuza. The better equivalent would have been the Caligula effect, which has adult cast, but not enough people play Caligula effect 1 and 2. And then there's also people who cite Clear Obscure X-Ray 33, which, 1, that's not a JRPG, and 2, yeah, I'm not sure it's a good example when you're using the game as an adult cast that somehow acts more like teenagers than the Persona characters do. Like, they don't really do the best with their adult cast in that game, in my opinion. You also have this part where people also want more diverse main characters in games, where people will sometimes post that one image where it's like, oh, here's this image of major characters in PS3 era and like so many white dudes, which, one, there are many games released all over the planet, you're now in your view, but since most people do focus on the big major franchises, that's where all the eyes tend to go to. Even if you have Grand Theft Auto, a massive franchise, where you have the whole entire aspect of, oh, they're on the game, different kind of cast. Oh, here's CJ San Andreas, with his whole entire storyline of corrupt officers putting cocaine in neighborhoods, having these gangs fight each other, everything so they can solve the problem and be more necessary, manipulating them for money, or the whole entire aspect where Grove Street specifically does not sell cocaine and drugs because they don't want that to reach the youth, even though they're still criminals, but the criminals with standards. How entire aspect, or Grand Theft Auto 5, where Franklin is more of a younger character, wanting to be the story-eyed dreamer, so it's good to pit a younger and less experienced character with then this completely depressed and despite having everything in the world, Michael or Trevor, who's insane, but also is incredibly loyal to people and hates dishonesty, hates betrayal about everything, and has trust issues, and aspects like that. Or in also other games like side game Battle of Gay Tony, a DLC for GTA 4, where he had his whole entire aspect of Luis Lopez being born, it's everything Liberty City, hating the drug life and drug dealing and wanting to be more legitimate, which is why having him pit with Gay Tony is also frustrates the hell out of him, because Gay Tony does several bad decisions on impulse, and just mixing stuff like that with Luis being Afro-Latino and aspects like that, or Grand Theft Auto 4 proper, with Nico being an immigrant to the US, but also having his past literally follow him to Liberty City, to where despite the fact that he wanted to leave this, although he still kind of also wants to investigate certain aspects of his past, ends up following him no matter where he goes. And this whole entire immigrant aspect of the story, Grand Theft Auto, tells so many tales, but I swear you'll only find the die-hard fans talking about that aspect. You also have Pokemon, which has been, for recent years, just putting the characters in so many different locales. Before, it primarily focused on more Japanese areas and Japanese issues, but has now just gone world setting. Different locales, regions, being different parts of the world, different kinds of stuff they can do with it, and expanding globally and everything. So you get to see more what they can do with Pokemon, more variety of locations, even if our main characters are just pretty much complete self-insert everything, they get to do more with the other cast everything, which is an interesting prospect that we see people mention when it comes to more recent Pokemon titles. Resident Evil has some other playable characters, whether it be people like Carlos, Sheva, Josh, and Ada, and although out of those examples, Ada's the only one that really continues to persist throughout the franchise, it's a thing they do try to have other characters with different backgrounds. Granted, those characters tend to be isolated to their one entry. 3 Remake tried to give more prominence to Carlos, but it was by having him take the position that Jill had in several segments, which made people frustrated even if they did like Carlos himself. Sheva was a co-protagonist of Resident Evil 5, yet people for some reason try to downplay her significance in the title to the point where people try to outright erase her from the game or say that the game would have been better without her addition. And Josh was one of the co-main characters of a DLC, so way less prominent, but he was one of the playable leads in that DLC for Resident Evil 5. I brought up Assassin's Creed Shadows and how miserable people got mad that the game had a female lead with Naoe as the assassin, and then a black male lead with Yasuke as a samurai, even though I feel like you think they would be happy of, hey, Assassin's Creed Japan, hey, get to play as a ninja who's also the assassin, or get to play as a samurai. I didn't even think in Assassin's Creed game would be like, hey, here's a samurai option. Going, ooh. But people were too focused, like, it's the second mention this. The irony of the people who claim that they're not obsessed with race and gender were obsessed with the race and gender of Naoe and Yasuke. Let that one sink in. There are some people who won't play a game if the protagonist doesn't look like they represent them, which, to that extreme, I can't possibly agree with for a variety of reasons, such as there's only 2 games I know that have a Dominican protagonist, and one of them is Luis Lopez, who I already mentioned. But it's one of those things some people go to that extreme, which is what people like creative characters, even if, according to statistics, people don't really do much with creative characters. But it's one of those things where some people only want to see themselves, which is putting yourself in a narrow view of everything, just like how there's people who are already in a majority who also only want to see themselves, or want this fictionalized version of the character that only exists in their heads. Meanwhile, they try to pretend and tell you that they're the genius who will fix gaming. You also have the Atelier franchise by Gus that literally most of the entries in that franchise have female leads. There are some entries that do have the option of male lead or only have male lead. Those are either spin-off titles, or like I said, they're an option. Sometimes the option is phrased weirdly as, pick the female lead for an Atelier experience, pick the male lead for an RPG experience. What that's supposed to mean? The Atelier series is RPGs. Well, that's supposed to mean, but that's an entire franchise that people think of female leads. Some people generally ignore it because Atelier isn't, one of the big names. And in fact, I have like an entire massive list of video games or franchises I've written down that have female leads that generally get ignored by people, probably because, like I said, they aren't the big name franchise. I remember everything, like that one PS3 image I showed earlier that focused on these big names, except not fully big names, because Right Retribution was on that list, and that is not a big name thing in the slightest. Who put Jake Conway on that freaking list? But you get the whole entire idea that, like I said, there's a lot more games released than people actually acknowledge or pay attention to, whether it be the more indie or AA scene, especially when it comes to video games kind of protagonists they have. Just want to ramp up on topic of protagonists, just the different kinds of protagonists a game could have and how they function, how the fact that a player is the one controlling them can affect how they see the narrative of the story being told, or else some characters have a reputation completely different than what the game itself actually portrays. Or how there's main characters people want more of. I want more villain main characters, but people will pull their punches because developers want to have a limit to what the player is able to do as a villain, or what the player is fully responsible for. Or are people who hate Starlight protagonists, other people love them and what they can do with them. Some people love creative characters, some people don't. Some people want more female leads, some just hate women. So this whole entire topic that can go back and forth in this whole entire thing. So that's all I gotta raise up on that topic of protagonists. Go out there, play a game, protagonist you enjoy, or a protagonist that gives you something that you didn't know you would like in a protagonist role or that type of thing. Or if it's a franchise you hope gets some kind of protagonist, then you can keep hoping, although bashing the thing that already exists for not being a hypothetical version in your head, no, you just gotta move on at some point. But make your voice heard that you want something different for the next title if they make one. Alright, that's what I gotta say about it. Okay, good day.